In the Bhagavad Gita, in a very famous verse, 10:10, Krishna makes a surprising statement. And he says something that you wouldn't expect him to say, necessarily, but I think it's not generally been noticed that he says something sort of unexpected. So in Bhagavad Gita 10:10, Krishna says, Tesham satata juttanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami bhuti yogam tam jinamam bhajantite. So literally Krishna says, for those people, Tesham. About Ananda, that was very beautiful. I'm an Ananda Monet fan. I want to publicly say that. Krishna says that for those people who are always engaged, always connected to me, and bhajatam priti purvaka, who worship me with love, Krishna says I give them something by which they come to me. So if you had to fill that in, what does Krishna give them by which they come to me? One might think bhakti or love, but what Krishna actually says is that I give them rational intelligence. I give them the ability to live by rational intelligence, by which they come to me. The word Krishna uses is buddhi. The word buddhi is often translated intelligence, but intelligence in a special sense. If we look at how Krishna uses that word buddhi, for example, in chapter 18, in verses 20 through 22, Krishna talks about jnanam, or knowledge, in the three modes of nature. And in verses 18:30 through 32, he talks about buddhi, intelligence in three modes of nature. So if you look at those sets of verses, it's very interesting, the difference between jnana and buddhi. And so I'm going to explain that. Hope this is not too technical. In Sanskrit, I'll make one further point. In Sanskrit, there's a recognition that there are two fundamental ways in which we understand things. One is, you could say in Western philosophical language, analytic, and the other is synthetic. Synthetic doesn't mean nylon or plastic. It means, the idea is, okay, in Sanskrit they're called samasa and gasa. So for example, we're all sitting here right now. And actually, I'll give an example from your music. Just a little while ago, we were listening to this very beautiful music. Nanda and her friends. So, in order to be present and really appreciate that music and understand what's going on, you actually have to perform two cognitive functions. One is analytic. In other words, when you hear the song, you can recognize different words. You can recognize the different notes that form melody and harmony. You know that that's the singer and that's the audience, that's the stage, those are the other seats, this is my seat, that's your seat, this is my head, that's my hand, this is my water bottle, that's the key to my car. In other words, there's so many things that you have to understand. Just the language of the songs. If you study language, the nature of human verbal communication, and at its most beautiful in song and poetry, it's extremely sophisticated from a neurological point of view. To hear the song, to understand the nuances and the emphases and the changes in tone, the expression of the singer and so on and so forth, actually requires, and that's why it's so difficult to get computers to do that, because it's so complicated. So the fact you're able to recognize all these things is analytic. And then samasa means that you have to be able to put it all together into one seamless experience. You have to put it together so that you're not actually thinking about the grammar of the songs, unless you're, let's say, a music scholar, you're not thinking about the mathematical ratios of the harmonies and the melodies, you're simply enjoying the beautiful music. And distinctions like, for example, that's the stage, those are the seats, the floor, the ceiling, my head, my hand. You're not thinking about those things. It's all just one experience. It's, to use the old expression, just to be here now. You're just present, immersed in one single experience. So, roughly speaking, jnana refers to that. When Krishna talks about jnana, he's talking about what we might call today worldview. What does the big picture look like to you? So, for example, those in the mode of goodness see the differences. We're different people. We may come from different races, genders, ages, ethnicities, nationalities, ages, sizes, everything. So, in the mode of goodness, you see all these differences, but you see that within all these apparently different people, there's the same ultimate spiritual nature. There's a oneness underlying all the variety. Just like, for example, when you hear all the beautiful notes of a song, well sung, there are different melodies or harmonies or words, but it's ultimately, you can experience that it's simply a single beautiful song. And so, in the mode of goodness, one sees the difference, but beyond the difference, there's a oneness. And we discuss this actually in terms of the nature of a society. For example, in America, there's this doctrine, and around the world, of equality, which is a metaphysical belief. Empirically, there's no such thing as equality. And yet there are hierarchies. Some people are richer. Some people have more power. Some people have more education. Some people are better looking. Some people have more talent, artistic, mathematical, and whatever. And so, in a sense, the underlying assumption of our political and judicial, moral, social system is what Krishna calls knowledge in the mode of goodness. In other words, we see the variety, we know that people are different, and yet we claim they are all somehow one. And that oneness is somehow fundamental. It's more important than the difference. So this man's rich or that man's poor, that's a fact, but there's a more important fact. They are all human beings and therefore they deserve equal justice under the law, and so on. Whatever actually takes place in courtrooms. But that's the idea. So, interestingly, Krishna teaches this very thing. Equality is actually one of the major topics in Bhagavad Gita, as I pointed out in my previous discussion with the devotees. And we're all equal, and therefore Krishna says, the Bhagavatam says, that if someone is within Vedic culture, and by Vedic culture here I mean, for our purpose here, Varnashram, because there are a lot of things that we call Vedic that aren't really. But one thing which is definitely Vedic is Varnashram. So the Bhagavatam says that if one strictly follows this fundamental structure of Vedic culture, Varnashram, and yet does not ultimately come to the point of loving God and seeing everyone within God, seeing the equality of creatures in God, then it's just a mundane life. Vedic culture is mundane without spiritual consciousness. Krishna says you cannot achieve pure devotion. You cannot achieve the highest devotion unless you see everyone equally. Now there's this tension, because in a spiritual society, in this world, there are hierarchies. Some people have managerial authority over other people. And parents have authority over children. Gurus are supposed to have some authority over disciples. So there are hierarchies, and we can't eliminate the hierarchies, but what Krishna is explaining is that if you are actually in goodness, not to speak of transcendental, then what really strikes you about reality is the oneness within the difference, within the hierarchy. It's the oneness. So if, let's say, obviously every one of us, we operate to the extent to which we're members of a religious institution like ISKCON, to that extent, we place ourselves inevitably within a hierarchy. If you decide to have children in your life, you create a hierarchy because you have to mother or father your children. If one becomes a teacher, a guru, not just an official initiating guru, but if one simply takes responsibility or tries to help others, to teach others, it creates a hierarchy. And Prabhupada was not an anarchist. We can't have chaos. There's a structure. Some people have authority over other people. Now, if someone in a higher position, in this sense of the term, as I explained before, actually believes that I'm better than these other people, they're actually disqualified in a spiritual society. And that's why Krishna says, if you really identify with your position in external society, in the Vedic system, for example, if someone thinks I'm really a sannyasi, there's an occupational hazard to being a sannyasi, and it's not just falling in love. Another occupational hazard for a sannyasi is starting to believe that I'm a sannyasi. Obviously we have duties. I'm not minimizing the duties of sannyas. They're serious duties, and someone in that position should try to execute them faithfully. But let's not forget, Freud's point. Freud actually did make some good points when he wasn't engaged in his anti-religious ravings. So the point that, for example, there's a superego, and that we're influenced by our society. We're influenced by people around us. Even if someone has a high position, say someone is a guru, and surrounded by adoring followers, externally, superficially, the guru's on top, disciples below. But if the guru is not perfectly pure, Prabhupada was pure. I don't see a lot of people around on that level, but I think we're doing the best we can. But the point is, if one is not completely pure, then having all these people around you constantly telling you that you're so wonderful, it may actually go to someone's head. It takes a lot of Krishna consciousness to have people bowing in front of you all day and night and telling you how great you are. And you can say the most absurd thing, but you're right. No, if you say that, Guru Dev, jai. You can just speak utter nonsense, and you'll be surrounded by all kinds of jai people. So, Lord Chaitanya said, I'm not a sannyasi. I'm not a vanaprastha, grihastha, brahmachari, shudra, vaishya, kshatriya, brahmana. So if someone really starts to believe, or someone really believes I'm a temple president, I'm actually a GBC, I'm a guru, if you really start to believe these things, you're in trouble. I don't mean that we shouldn't do our duties. We should take our duties very seriously. That's not who we are. I'm not better than someone because I'm a sannyasi and they're something else. It doesn't make me better. It just means we have different duties. And someone may be, obviously some people are more spiritually advanced than others, but what is spiritual advancement? It's precisely thinking you're not better. What makes someone more advanced spiritually is that they don't think they're better than someone else. For example, let's say you have children, and let's say, God forbid, one of your children is sick. You don't think you're better, or let's do this another way. Let's say you have a brother or a sister, and that brother or sister is sick. You don't think you're better than that person. Someone, in other words, the fact that I'm physically healthier than someone else in my family, I don't think, or my friend, I don't think I'm better than that person. So spiritually, someone may be healthier than another person. But that's not the eternal reality. Someone being spiritually sick is not eternal. It's just a temporary disease. In their normal state, that person is a pure soul. And so if I think I'm better than someone because spiritually they're a little ill right now, that means I'm in the bodily concept of life, and that means I'm a hypocrite. And as I often say, if you study all human institutions, political, social, cultural, religious, I mean, undoubtedly, if you want to say, like, who's the all-time historical champion in hypocrisy, it's definitely religious institutions. And I'm not talking about ISKCON right now, I'm making a general historical observation about the dangers of being in this world. Because religious institutions, ISKCON or any other, make the biggest claims. They claim the most for themselves. You may represent the king, we represent God. You may know geology or, what's that song? Don't know much about history. Anyway, those of you who know that song will appreciate that reference. So, someone may know more than someone else about history or biology or this or that, but in a religious institution, no, but we know what God is. Your superior academic knowledge is trivial compared to our superior spiritual knowledge. You are a conditioned soul. We are the walking liberated. And so, as you can see, if we are conditioned souls, this can really make you go loopy. One can really develop a type of arrogance. In fact, Prabhupada said that the Kali Yuga came on because of the degradation of Brahmins who thought they were a big deal. So it's, and then in Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati talk about people in religions who have all kinds of external symbols to signify their superiority, their distinction. We're not like you in terms of dress, in terms of markings on the body. This is what the Acharyas say. They say the worst kind of Vaishnavism, the worst kind of Vaishnavism is that in which one identifies Krishna consciousness with external things. That's the worst kind of Vaishnavism. So we can't just be a movement that, with quite a bit of enthusiasm, criticizes everything in the world and everyone in it. But if anyone says anything about us, throw them out. We need to develop the power of self-analysis, self-criticism, where we don't simply celebrate ourselves, but we also take a good look at ourselves. After all, Trinadapi Sunichena, what does that mean? I mean, it's very scary. People carve their initials on trees. That's why I heard, more tolerant than a tree. I thought, oh my God, that means someone carves their initials on me. I'm supposed to just stand there. But so it's, to be a spiritual movement is very serious business. It takes a tremendous amount of self-honesty, self-criticism, self-analysis, not only individually, but collectively. And so we just celebrated 50 years. I'm speaking this way because it's basically all devotees are. So we just celebrated 50 years. So did anyone detect even a tiny trace amount of self-analysis, self-criticism, introspection? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? I didn't. Maybe you did. You can send me a link or something. But anyway, so I talked about this jnanam, or knowledge. It's the worldview. How do you see the world? When you look at the world, this is what Krishna's talking about, 1820 and 21. Mode of ignorance is just a complete write-off. I mean, they just can't figure anything out. But if you compare goodness and passion, when you look out at the world, what strikes you most? Is it the high and the low, the differences, or the oneness? When the leaders of this movement look out at the world, or look at themselves, or their relationships with other people, what really strikes them? Is it that we're all one, or that I'm above you? This is not an accusation. I'm just saying this is a good question to ask. So, moving right along, because we talked about rational. So, getting back to the point about Krishna, there's another kind of intelligence. Knowledge means the worldview. How does the world look to you? Jnana, at least in the context of chapter 18. But what is buddhi in comparison to that? Buddhi, for example, Krishna says things like to know what is dangerous, what is not dangerous. When should I get into something? When should I withdraw? Accept, reject. It's being able to analyze things, right and wrong, good and bad, making those distinctions. And it's this buddhi. Like, for example, in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, which Prabhupada called Contents of the Gita Summarized, and it's a very large chapter, I think there's 72 verses, and the whole chapter pivots on verse 239, which is roughly halfway through, because Krishna himself divides chapter 2 into two sections. In the first section, because at 239 he says, Esha te vihita sankhye buddhir yoge tvimang shanu. He says, because the first half of chapter 72 is basically, you're not your body. The soul is eternal, never dies. That which is eternal never changes. That which changes is not. So it's all those verses about establishing very powerfully this difference between spirit and matter, eternal, temporary, soul and body. So after doing that, Krishna says, what I have just done, what I have just explained to you, is buddhi. Esha te bihita sankhye buddhir. But he says, I have just given you buddhi, or analytic intelligence, reason, sankhye, in a philosophical sense. And now I will explain it to you in practice. Yoga means in practice. So it's very interesting. Krishna introduces at 239 these terms, Sankhya Yoga. If you know the six, sort of the great schools of thought in Indian history, you're supposed to be able to defeat those before you sit on the Vyasasana. They're divided into pairs. So you have, for example, Purva and Uttara Mimamsa. Well, anyway, I won't get into the whole thing now. So one pair is philosophy and practice, Sankhya and Yoga. Arjuna will pick up on this, and then Krishna will say more about Sankhya and Yoga later. For example, Krishna will say, Sankhya Yoga pratak bala pravadantina pandita. The childish, literally the childish bala, claim that philosophy and practice are different. But the wise know that if you're really good at one, you'll get the benefits of both. But then Krishna says, anyway, so this is buddhi. Then Krishna says, the second half of chapter 2, he's going to explain buddhi in practice. So then, again, the verse 10:10, Teshang Satajuktanam, Krishna says, you will come to him by buddhi. Buddhi yoga, the practice of reason, spiritual reason. For example, Krishna says in chapter 18 that samak sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakting labate parang, that you will achieve the highest devotion, bhakti, when you are equal to all living beings. So Krishna says, pandita samadarshana, that the wise see everyone equally. Krishna says, I'm equal to everyone. Samohang sarva bhuteshu. So buddhi in this case means, among other things, that you look at the differences of this world, different people, different species, and so on. You look at the equality and you come to an analytic conclusion that the equality is more important. So, for example, as I said, to think that I'm better than this person because I'm a man is obviously barbaric. I mean, it's just like you're going back to the caveman days. You should maybe hit one over the head with a club and drag it into your cave. So, that's the qualification of a spiritual leader that you could analyze in this way. So now how does this relate? Because we did advertise the topic tonight, and I don't want anyone to ask for a refund. So the topic was, which I have here, I just want, you need your password, Pradyumna, to get in here. So let's take all of that, this discussion of intelligence and reason, And then see how it applies not within our culture, among devotees or among people who follow the Vedic system, but what about the world in general? What about the modern world? How does this relate to them? Oops. Oh, it has case sensitive? Oh, sorry. Is it all capitals? First one, Y-A-X 6. I've never done this in a program. Okay. So the first question was, is a religious worldview compatible with a rational or scientific worldview? So what does it mean to be rational? Obviously it means to use reason. So rational means based on or in accord with reason or logic. And reason means to understand and form judgments with logic. Interestingly, dictionaries actually go in loops. Like they give synonyms, and if you look up the synonyms, it refers you back to the first one. So this is a typical dictionary loop. But anyway, what does it mean? Because Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness must be religion with philosophy. So we have three things going on here, in a sense. There's Krishna's discussion of buddhi and intelligence and logic and reason. There's Prabhupada's statement that we must have religion and philosophy or reason. And there's the world out there that has its own views of what is logic and what is reason, what is science, and what it means to prove something. So we have these three, what do they call this? Triangulating? I saw that in a dragon movie where they actually killed the bad dragons by triangulating them. Anyway, never mind that. So, logic or reason, to be rational, ultimately, I think, in this case, and if you mind me, hope you don't mind me doing a little, it's not really technical philosophy, but it comes down to epistemology. Epistemology means basically, how do you know you know? Under what circumstances can you reasonably claim that you know something or that you've proved something? Under what circumstances would that be a false claim? So, Lord Chaitanya makes a very powerful epistemological claim. A very important epistemological claim in the Chaitanya Charitamrita in his conversations with Prakashananda and Prakashananda and Sarvabhauma. Interestingly, he makes exactly the same claim as Aristotle. So, and the same claim is also today widely accepted in academic philosophy. And that is, any science or any way of looking at the world, any kind of science, any kind of rational system, ultimately must fall back upon a claim that something is self-evident. And so I'll explain why Aristotle said that and why Lord Chaitanya said exactly the same thing when he was talking to these two great scholars. For example, to do empirical science, any kind of science, you have to assume that something is true that you could never prove. What you have to assume is true, even though you could never prove it scientifically, is that there's a real world outside your mind. Because if you're just imagining the world, then all of your science is not giving us information about an objective world. It's just, you're just measuring your own fantasy or your own delusion. So you can't prove there's a real world outside your mind, because any proof you gave would involve assuming that the world really is out there. Like if you say, okay, I'm pinching you, you can feel that. But if I'm dreaming the world, I'm also dreaming that I'm pinching you, and I'm also dreaming that you feel it. So, to give another example of something you could never prove, but it's actually the basis of your life, even though you can't prove it. It has nothing to do with God or the soul. almost every day, or probably several times a week, people go to sleep and dream. People go to sleep and dream. Now, when you wake up, you decide within a moment or two that your waking state is more real than your dream state. You can't prove that. You can't prove it is, but you assume it to be true. Or to give another example from the political realm, where actually Thomas Jefferson, former British citizen up until 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, in which he used Aristotle's logic, and actually, without knowing it, Lord Chaitanya's logic. He said in the Declaration of Independence, a very famous statement, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And he was using that term in the Aristotelian sense and in the sense that Lord Chaitanya used it. He said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights, and so on. So Jefferson claimed, so what is Aristotle doing? What are we doing when we wake up and decide that our waking state is more real than our dream state? What is science doing when it assumes, though it can't prove, there's a real world out there to study? What did Lord Chaitanya mean when he said to Sarvabhauma and Prakashananda that it's self-evidently true, that the Vedic knowledge is self-evidently true? What it means is that certain experiences present themselves to us in such a powerful way that we cannot deny their truth. In other words, it proves itself. That because, for example, I can say that, okay, yesterday I was in Chawton, England. Highly recommend it for those who want a spiritual retreat. Anyway, it's Jane Austen's village. So I was in Chawton, England yesterday, and say I tell you that, and you say, well, I don't believe it. I think you're just saying that. Someone saw you in a bar in London or something, a pub. And I say, no, I wasn't at a pub and drinking. I was actually in Chawton. And I can prove it, and I can call up a witness. Okay, here's one of my disciples, and they'll say that I was in Chawton. And someone can say, well, I don't believe that person. Then someone else could say, well, I can give a character reference for that disciple. It's a very honest person. Yeah, but that's just one of your friends giving the character reference. So you can, to give a physical example, I can claim water boils 100 degrees Celsius. Prove it. Put a pot of water on the stove. Put in a thermometer. 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. I win. No, wait, that's not pure water. We have to test the water. That's not pure mercury. You have to test the water and the mercury. You have to test the water testing chemicals. You have to test the chemicals that test the water testing chemicals. So Aristotle's point was, whatever you claim to be true, someone can push you into an infinite, endless regress of proofs. Because whatever you say, they can say, prove it. You give a proof, I don't believe that, prove that. And so at a certain point, as Aristotle points out, you have to simply take a stand and say, there are certain facts here which are self-evident. They just prove themselves. Like, for example, the fact that there's a real world outside my mind. My experience of the world is such that the quality of the experience demonstrates to me that there's a real world out there. Or when you wake up from a dream, even though while I was dreaming, I completely accepted it. To me, that was reality. That was the only reality while I was dreaming. But when I wake up, I experience another level of reality, which is somehow more real. And that's self-evident to me. That's what, similarly, when you read, let's say, Bhagavad Gita, or when you chant Hare Krishna, or, in other words, when you somehow experience Krishna consciousness, that consciousness presents itself to us in a way that is self-evidently true. In other words, it's exactly analogous, and Plato talks about this, if you know Plato. It's exactly analogous to waking up and concluding, without doubt, that your waking state is more real. So when you wake up to Krishna consciousness, you understand that it's simply more real. As much as your waking state is more real than dream, your Krishna conscious state is more real than when, as we say in this business, you're in Maya. So when Lord Chaitanya was talking to Prakashananda and Sarvabhauma, he said that the truth of the Vedas, and he was using the word Veda in the broad sense, not just the Karma Kanda. Lord Chaitanya said that when you read this knowledge, you understand that it's self-evidently true. Now that's the epistemological basis of what we're doing. What about the world out there? What will they say? After all, what is science? Why not read a definition of science here? Well, maybe not read a definition of science. I can't find that. Okay, let's say science. Whoops, Spanish keyboard. One definition is a branch of knowledge or study dealing with a body of facts or truths, systematically arranged and showing the operation of general laws. We make that one. Now, it can also mean secondarily, not primarily, but secondarily, it can mean systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. But that's just a kind of science. That's not science, that's a kind of science. So let's go through this definition of science and think about Krishna consciousness at its best and see if this fits. A branch of knowledge, yes, or study, yes, dealing with a body of facts or truths. Now this is actually, it's, how should I put it? We claim that Krishna is a fact. We claim that the soul is a fact. We claim many things are truths or facts which we receive in disciplic succession from great teachers like Prabhupada. Now, if someone says that Krishna consciousness is not a science, they would have to demonstrate that these are not really truths and facts. The problem with it is that a priori, they can't prove that. I'll tell you what I mean by a priori. Okay, there are certain claims that one can make which can be empirically studied or have to be. For example, if I say, I have great news for all of you, apart from spiritual things, and that is unicorns are actually alive in England, and they're white. So, in fact, I saw one in Hampshire. So I just made a claim, there are unicorns in England. Now you can empirically study that. You could, let's say the government takes me so seriously because I'm a bona fide guru in the Hare Krishna movement. And so whatever I say, they take very seriously. So they send out this massive search party, and they literally cover all of Hampshire. So like, you got people standing at most 10 feet apart or something. And they say, no, we proved there are no unicorns. Or maybe they discover one. Because as you know, gurus are never wrong. So, actually you don't know that, do you? So, but that's an example. That's a claim which you can empirically study. Now, what if I say, for example, I just saw a square circle? You don't have to go look for one. If you just know what the English word square means, and if you understand the English word circle, you know that the two words together, a square circle, actually mean nothing. They're not referring to anything. In fact, they cannot refer to anything. They cannot possibly refer to anything, and therefore they're meaningless. It's a meaningless, and so there's no such thing. Therefore, you don't have to look for one because logically, not empirically, it's not that you went out and looked for a square circle and couldn't find one. But rather logically, there can be no such thing. You don't need to go look. Now, I'm claiming that in the same way, the idea of an empirical test for Krishna consciousness is logically absurd. It's actually logically absurd, and I'll explain why. For one thing, in empirical science, the central process by which it moves, I also in Reading, for those of you in Reading, this is a rerun. We'll give you $1 back because you've already heard this. Not the whole 5. So, the heart of empirical science is the controlled experiment. The controlled experiment. That is empirical science. Now, therefore, it follows logically that you can only perform a controlled experiment on something you can control. Again, that's obvious. So, what can you control? You can either control things that are inferior to you, like let's say this hat. I control this hat by putting it on my head and then removing it. I can't control it by ripping it into shreds with my bare hands because, I can't do that. But I can control it. I get a scissors or something. So because I can control this hat, I can experiment on it. I can empirically study it because I can control it. What about, let's say, the Prime Minister of England? Theresa May, isn't it? God bless the Prime Minister. So, obviously, from a legal point of view, she's in a superior position. Here in England, she has far more power than I do. And therefore, I can't perform a controlled experiment on her. That sounds inappropriate for sannyasi. Okay, let me put that another way. Let's say I wanted to investigate her. I would have to get access to her. For example, I'll give you an example. Right now in France, they're having a presidential election, and one candidate that was a very strong candidate, François Fillon, that defeated Sarkozy in the primaries. Anyway, don't ask me how I know all this. François Fillon, he has now been accused of basically nepotism, that he hired his own wife and gave her large amounts of money, almost €1 million, to work for him, and they can't exactly figure out what she did. And then apparently he hired his 2 sons, and they can't figure out what they did. Now it's interesting, though. They had to get court order. They had to get a court order to do that. They didn't have the power to investigate him. They didn't have the power to... So when you're dealing with human beings, there's a legal system which protects people from intrusion, protects people from manipulation, or under certain legal circumstances, one may have the power, for example, to order someone to testify, to order them to turn over their papers, their computer hard drives. Under other legal circumstances, one may be controlled by being incarcerated. So if you just look at typical, legal hierarchies, under certain circumstances, people can control others, and under other circumstances, they can't. So let's say we're trying to find God. Now, we have to say a word about the process of designing experiments. No one ever searches for something without knowing something about it, or without believing or suspecting they know something about it. If I ask you to look for something like, let's say I ask you to look for a trichonus. What if I say, I'm going to give $1 million to the first person that can bring me a trichonus? And I really mean it. And you say, well, tell me something about it. No, I can't give you any information. You can't look for it. It's the word entailed, for example, the number 5 includes the number 3, just in terms of quantity. So if you're going to, the concept of searching logically requires that you know something. Otherwise, you cannot search. If you're searching for a trichonus and you know nothing about it, what it would mean to search? Would you look up or down or left or right? Is it an idea? Is it a physical object? Is it a person? You cannot search. You have no criteria to even begin to search. So if you're searching for God, or if you're searching for brown dwarfs in astronomy are basically celestial bodies that were on the way to becoming stars, but their internal combustion didn't reach a sufficient heat, and they failed and, didn't make the team. They didn't make the star team. And so they kind of, they're relegated to brown dwarfs. Now, an astronomer at UCLA, when I was there many years ago, a well-known astronomer, believed there were brown dwarfs. They hadn't proved there were. And I saw a film, he'd say, I know they're there, we're going to find them. And so in order to search for brown dwarfs, they reasoned, well, if there is such a thing as a brown dwarf, it would probably be like this, it would probably reflect light in a certain way, and therefore they searched the universe for that kind of phenomenon. And they believe they found it. So again, when you're, like for example, let's say you're looking for your car keys. Where did I put my car keys? You don't look up in the sky. You don't look in a place you didn't go to. You look in places where keys would fit. You don't look inside a little box that's 20 times smaller than your keys. So the very process of searching, whether you're looking for car keys or conducting a sophisticated scientific experiment, the very process of searching logically requires that you know something about what you're searching for, or that you suspect something about it. If it's there, it would be like this. So now let's transfer these facts to the search for God. The first point is, what kind of God are you searching for? Assuming that you're searching for what sometimes philosophers call a triple O God, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. That's the Latin part of English since the Norman invasion, and Church Latin, I have to say. But the Germanic would be all good, all strong, and all knowing. That's the Germanic. Anyway, it's a linguistic note about English. So, let's say you're searching for a God who's all good, all strong, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. All good. You would assume, you definitely assume, that this God is infinitely greater than me. On every level. I mean, I'm not omnipotent, I'm not omniscient, and I can't say I'm infinitely good. So I'm looking for a being who in power, in knowledge, in every relevant, significant category is infinitely greater than me. So now the logical question is, how do you look for something infinitely greater than you? Based on our experience in this world, based on our earthly experience, how do we try to investigate things that are significantly greater than us? And the answer is, we try to get on their good side. We try to please them. What if you're trying to get a job? Let's say you're down and out. You need a job. There's this big rich company. They don't need you. They got 900 people applying for that job. They couldn't care less. I mean, you mean nothing to them, but they mean everything to you. So the balance of power is all on their side, and therefore you're the one that has to read those books and articles about successful job interviews, and how you dress and how you carry yourself and what to say and what not to say. You're the one that has to please them. Let's say you go before a judge. The judge has the power. Let's say, well, not in Europe, but in America. Let's say your life is in the hands of this judge. In America, we have this Vedic system of execution. So, the point here is that whether it's the danger of incarceration, a financial penalty, execution, whatever it may be, your fate is in that judge's hands. You have to persuade the judge. You can't walk up to the judge's bench and say, Judge, convince me. I'm open, convince me. What's your best argument? You can't do that. You can't walk up to the judge and say, hold it right there. I'm going to kind of, I want to look into your eyes, so just don't move. And you bring out, got a little like doctor's light thing, you're looking in his eyes, don't blink till I say you can. You can't do that. I mean, the real world isn't like that. There are power relationships, powers of knowledge, just power of control. And so the idea that you're going to empirically study God is absurd. It's absurd. It's like, what would be a scientific, let's say you take a light meter You can't measure sound with a light meter. You can't measure light with a sound meter. You can't figure out, I don't know, what temperature it is with the Geiger counter. It's just the mere fact that something is a scientific instrument doesn't mean your application of it is scientific. The mere fact that empiricism in certain environments, in certain conditions, can function rationally does not mean that your application of empiricism is scientific. In fact, it could be wildly irrational, as for example, in thinking you could empirically study God. Now, here's the good news. God, every time your computer goes to sleep, it wants the password again, but that's okay. We still love you. Now, Bhakti yoga is so sublime, devotional service to Krishna, because Krishna says that I will actually allow you to study me. Even though someone is infinitely greater than me, if that person agrees to me studying them, questioning them, then I can do it. So, I really apologize to you. I should have actually saved this. I'm going to have to type this in one more time. There's one definition I want to read to you. In Bhakti Yoga, when we practice Bhakti Yoga, which is scientific, or it's rational, let's say it's logical in this sense. Scientific, I'll get to next, but it's logical in this sense. Because given the nature of our existence, given the presumed nature of the God we're searching for, the process of devotion, of pleasing a greater person, is a rational approach, because logically it corresponds to what we find functions in the real world. In the real world, that's how people get access to superiors. And so we're applying something with a rational basis. Now, having taken up the process of bhakti, we actually can perform a controlled experiment in the sense that Krishna has given us authority over our own lives. Such as in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says that you have a right to perform your duty. Your duty is born of your nature. So Krishna has given us free will. Think of it. It's like if you tell your little child, okay, you can watch any program you want on television, is to give the child a certain authority. When the parents give the kid the keys to the car, now you're too young to get the keys to the car, right? You can't drive yet, you're too small. But when parents give a child the keys to the car, they're giving that person the authority or the power to drive the car. My parents never would have given me the keys if they would have known more about me. But anyway, so Krishna has given us free will. Krishna has actually given us the authority to decide our own fate. We have to look around, see what's what, use our best intelligence, and decide what we want to make of our lives. Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita. He explicitly says to Arjuna at the very end, Yatechasi tata kuru, do as you wish. Not only that, Krishna is so, unfanatical. He's actually a very open-minded person. Consider this fact. According to Bhagavad Gita, you can elevate yourself in this universe. You can get wisdom and happiness without Krishna. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that those in the mode of goodness worship the demigods, not him. Yajante Sattvika Devan, chapter 14. So, and yet Krishna says that the mode of goodness brings happiness. Tasmat sattva nirmalatvat prakasha kamananyam sukha sangena. Krishna says that goodness, virtue, brings happiness. And goodness, sattva guna, brings wisdom. And it brings elevation. Urdvanga chanti sattvasta. That those in the mode of goodness go upward, they're elevated. Now, if you look at the history of religion in India, you find that in the great debates between Buddhism and you could say Vaishnavism or Hinduism, the Buddhists gave an argument, which interestingly is very similar to the argument that Plato gave against Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that is, the Buddhists said, in our system of karma, everything is fair. You get what you deserve. It's all based on your virtue or vice. Whereas in the Hindu side, you have these whimsical gods who may just punish you or reward you without any real basis. It's just their own preferences. But interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, it's like, for example, in certain forms of Christianity, you may be a good person. In every other way, you may be a good person, virtuous, kind. But if you don't accept the true doctrine, you'll be obliterated. Well, actually, you'd be lucky if you were obliterated. You'll really go into a lake of fire to be tortured forever, which is obviously it's a somewhat psychotic theology. But still, the idea is that even if you're virtuous, you'll be tortured and punished in hell because you didn't accept a doctrine. So the qualification for elevation is not moral, it's doctrinal, which of course is the opposite of what Jesus taught, as every scholar knows. Jesus taught, for example, as you treat the least of my people, you treat me, and so on. The Good Samaritan, didn't believe in church doctrine. He was just a Good Samaritan. And Jesus pointed him out. So Jesus taught, love God with all your heart, soul, and might, love your neighbor as yourself. So there is a moral and a spiritual qualification to be saved. I wouldn't go into the whole church history. It's obviously there's not time, but to make it very simple, basically, after Jesus was gone, whether he was in Glastonbury or Kashmir or at the right hand of God, everyone knows they changed everything. And so rather than having a simple moral and spiritual qualification, love your neighbor as yourself, love God with all your heart, there is a doctrinal qualification. If you don't accept a particular doctrine, which amazingly Jesus actually didn't even teach, but if you don't accept the doctrine that the church is giving you, then you'll be tortured forever. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, there are no doctrinal requirements for happiness in this world. Again, you can be elevated to a higher planet. You can be wise and happy without Krishna, if you're a good person. You won't go to Krishna, but there are no if you're virtuous. And again, I'm going to start to wrap up, but there's a very powerful question that Socrates asked a person named Euthyphro. It's very famous in Western philosophy, this question, which it's a brilliant question, and it goes right to the heart, in a sense, of Krishna consciousness. Euthyphro was this very self-righteous, puffed-up fool. Socrates talked to a lot of fools. And so Socrates asked him, are certain actions good, morally good, because the gods love those actions? Or it pleases the gods? Or do the gods love those actions because they are good? In other words, contrary to what the Buddhists say about karma, is Krishna rewarding and punishing us rationally because of the actual quality of what we do? It has nothing to do with the jealous God. Krishna, unlike other conceptions of God, does not need any 12-step programs, for jealousy management or anger management and so on. So Krishna tells us to do things not because he likes them. He likes them because they're intrinsically good. because they're intrinsic. When you tell your child you have to play nicely with other children, you can't, stick knives in other children, it's not that the parents are imposing their values. They're giving the children objective instruction that it is objectively more virtuous, existentially superior to love and not to hate. So there's no doctrinal requirements in Bhagavad Gita. The way all this gets back to our discussion of reason is that Krishna consciousness satisfies all of the basic requirements for science. Now, science, empirical science, by their own rules, cannot study Krishna. By their own rules. Their own ground rules forbid them, prevent them from studying Krishna. And therefore, now, one further point I want to make about Krishna consciousness. We can prove logically that empirical science can never give a complete description of reality. As follows. If we study our own core understanding of reality, for example, even though empirical science obviously cannot prove there's a real world outside your mind. I mean, if you know logic, you know it's impossible. We accept it as true. So similarly, consider, for example, let's say something horrible happens. Like, okay, I'll give this example again. I gave it in Reading. That horrible terrorist attack in London near Parliament. Now, virtually every sane person in this country, and actually every sane person in the world, was horrified by that and correctly saw it as an evil act. Now, if someone says to us that actually it wasn't evil, there's nothing evil about it, for the simple reason there's no such thing as evil, because only things we can empirically study are real, and you can't empirically study, there's no empirical object called evil or good. I should point out also that the claim that only things we can empirically study can be shown to be real is philosophically absurd because it contradicts itself. You cannot empirically prove that only things you empirically study are real. So if it's true that you can only say something is real if you empirically prove it, then it's not true that only things you can empirically prove are real. In other words, if it's true, it's not true. So it's philosophical absurdity. But in any case, we know, every sane person in the world knows that was an evil act. Evil is not physical, it's metaphysical. In Greek, it means beyond the physical. It is a value, it is a moral value, and it's metaphysical. It's a classic example of a metaphysical object, not a physical object. So if there really is evil in the world, or good, if there's really virtue in the world, then what it means is that we live in a bi-dimensional universe. That's your choice. Either when we say that it's evil to kill innocent people, either no, it's not. It's just that blind evolution neurologically wired us to falsely think that it is, because gene pools that thought that survived better. It's not even true why they would, because actually the real fact is that when you murder weaker members of the species, you actually become more rugged. But anyway, although you become evil also. Like for example, let's say you were a hardcore environmentalist. Like all you care about is achieving a healthy, sound environment on this planet. It would follow logically, if that was your only value, that we should probably kill at least 4 billion humans. If we live in a world in which there's nothing but physical things, there's no such thing as moral justification. Let's say there would be nothing wrong with a scientist if he or she could get away with it, murdering, raping, because the scientist would know, I didn't do anything wrong. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Right and wrong can't be empirically demonstrated. You can see where this goes. So if you believe that's not true, some things are really right, some things are really wrong, then you believe in a bi-dimensional universe which has a physical and a metaphysical dimension, and that's what most people believe. So if we talk about science giving a complete description of reality, not simply according to their own somewhat loony standards, but to the satisfaction of humanity, they can never do it. Because their own rules, the rules of empirical investigation, do not allow them to talk about metaphysical entities. And since almost everybody that lives on earth strongly believes that it is self-evident that some metaphysical entities really exist, therefore, for humanity in general, empirical science can never give a complete description of reality. That's very simple, isn't it? Here we come, the Hare Krishna movement, because we are actually providing, on our better days, a metaphysical science. That's the whole point. We are completing the description of reality by giving the metaphysical science. Now, we know that in the Western world and other parts of the world, people really don't like religious institutions. A lot of people don't want to join a religious institution. But what I tell people is that, let's say Hegel was right, Professor Hegel, German philosopher. Let's say history actually moves dialectically, in the sense that thesis, antithesis, synthesis, such as thesis means just the way things are right now, and then there's antithesis. Like let's say, for example, let's say someone meets another person, boy meets girl. And, the guy has his point of view and the girl has her point of view. Like Pride and Prejudice. You all know Pride and Prejudice. I mean, this is England. Come on. Come on, guys. Okay, anyway, say a boy meets a girl. And so they both have their own way of living and their own values, and so they meet. So the thesis is they just have their own lives. The antithesis is they meet and don't get along. They offend each other in some way. The synthesis is that they learn to get along. So they go back. They're each individual, but now they've learned to get along with each other. And so, thesis, the way things are now. Antithesis, something contradicts it, something opposes it. And then, like for example, a river going into the ocean. And the two rivers merge. So you have a terrible religious history in the Western world. I mean, it's really awful. You've all heard the list, right? Crusades, Inquisitions, et cetera, et cetera. And what I always tell people, witch trials, that if you think it was really bad, you should study the actual history, and you'll find out it was much worse. It was actually much worse than you think. I mean, here, we had Bloody Mary in England, and so on. So, therefore, the antithesis, people are like fed up. They don't want religion. A lot of people. Some people do, but a lot of people think, no, we don't want religion. But the synthesis is to get good religion. If you have bad food in the market, the solution is not starvation. You have to get good food. If there's bad food and you reject it, you can't starve. You need good food. People cannot live without metaphysics because we are by nature metaphysical. We by nature hold values. People fight for their values. When it comes down to it, people will give up their own life, which is all you've got physically, is your body. They will actually give up their whole ball of wax, whatever that means. They will give up everything they have physically for a metaphysical principle, such as freedom, or to save their families, love and duty, justice. If you study the history of the world, people are willing to sacrifice anything material, including their lives, for metaphysical principles. That means we not only live in a bi-dimensional universe, the metaphysical is actually, as the word implies, above the physical. And so therefore, people can't live without metaphysics. And if they don't have good religion, they have bad religion. The solution is good religion. So Krishna consciousness is very much needed. We have to really somehow or other find a way to communicate to people. As we know, modern society is a headless body, but the problem is that we tend to be a disembodied head. If you think of the universal form in the Rig Veda and the Bhagavatam, the arms of the universal form, or the arms of the body are the Kshatriyas, the waste of the body or the stomach is the Vaishyas. I mean, it's not like we have a lot of power in society to direct society. It's not that we have great resources to reach people in the West. So we don't, the head is there. We understand who Prabhupada is, who Krishna is, but we don't have, so to speak, a social body to change the world. Anyway, I hope you can see that Krishna consciousness, because it's true, is actually rational. It's actually a science. And that when Krishna says you can come to me by buddhi yoga, actually, I'd like to read you something from Prabhupada. Oh my God, I got to do this again. Okay. I want to read you, end by reading something from Prabhupada. Oh my God, haste makes waste. I think I memorized it. So if anyone hacks into your computer, you know it's me. I'd like to read you something from Prabhupada. See if I can get a screen here. Do we have internet here? Oops. Okay, here it is. All glories to Prabhupada, all these websites that give us Prabhupada's books. Okay, I'm making this point in Krishna West, which you may have heard of, that we have to be rational, we have to study history, social science, and Shastra and Prabhupada to understand how to really spread this movement in a very large way. Someone could say, no, purity is everything. I make the point, Prabhupada was pure in India before he got on the boat. It didn't work. He needed the right strategy, even as a liberated pure devotee, as Prabhupada said. So, what is the role of learning? What is the role of you could say, so-called material knowledge? First of all, the Isopanishad says, Vidyang cha justad vedo bhayang saha. It's very interesting. You get beyond the material world, not by spiritual knowledge, the Isopanishad, the Vedas say, but by material knowledge. It's right there. Avidyaya, by knowledge of this world, material world, mrityung tirtva, you cross over death. And vidyayamritam, but you enjoy immortality by spiritual knowledge. So the picture the Vedas give us is that you have to know both. How can you give yourself to Krishna if you don't know yourself? If you're totally naive about your own psychology, if we are totally naive, if we don't know history, so we think some things are Vedic when actually they come from, let's say, the Muslim world, but we think they're Vedic. If we don't understand ourselves, if we don't understand the world, and we're trying to give ourselves to Krishna, to transcend the world, you have to know what it is. To transcend your own conditioned identity, you have to understand what it is. So, this is what Prabhupada says. This is purport to 1.5.22. Human intellect, buddhi, again, Krishna says, you come to me by buddhi yoga. And Prabhupada says, human intellect is developed for advancement of learning, not just in Bhagavad Gita, in art, science, philosophy. And by the way, when Prabhupada says philosophy, if you look at Prabhupada says, religion and philosophy together, he doesn't mean, as so many people believe, that religion and learning are philosophy, like learning the doctrine. Okay, I can now pass, a test, a multiple choice or true-false test on our basic philosophy. That's not what Prabhupada means. If you actually look in the Veda base, what does Prabhupada mean religion and philosophy? He means it in the sense that everybody else does outside us, and that is, you actually know how to reason. You know how to present good arguments. You know how to recognize valid evidence. You recognize invalid evidence, invalid arguments. He means philosophy. So Prabhupada says here, human intellect is developed for advancement of learning in art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, economics, politics, etc. And by culture of such knowledge, the human society can attain perfection of life. This is Prabhupada. Human society can attain perfection of life by studying these sciences and humanities. This perfection of life culminates in the realization of the Supreme Being, Vishnu. So, what does the word culminate mean? I'll just read you, because it's very important. I'm trying to really look very closely at what Prabhupada is saying here. Culminate means to reach a climax or point of highest development. So it's not that, I mean, those of us who joined the movement a long time ago, it's like you reject everything and join the Hare Krishna movement. You know, we were young and immature, but that's not what Prabhupada's saying here. Prabhupada's saying here that human society advances through knowledge, and then that culminates at the highest point, it's Krishna consciousness. He's not saying that we reject education, we reject science, we reject all this knowledge, we reject psychology, and instead read Bhagavad Gita. That's not the picture Prabhupada's giving us here. So Prabhupada says this perfection of life culminates in the realization of the Supreme Being Vishnu, etc. Prabhupada says when advancement of knowledge is applied in the service of the Lord, the whole process becomes absolute. So I strongly urge you to apply things like the history of religion, social science, the sociology of religious movements, and Shastra, and Prabhupada, so we can figure out how we can actually become a world religion and not the little thing that we are now. And I don't mean to, I'm not blaming anyone or criticizing anyone. You know, devotees are great souls. There's so many devotees here that are doing great service with great devotion and, you know, with real bhakti and with real intelligence. So many devotees doing so many programs. I'm just saying all of us, for Prabhupada's sake, have to figure this out. So when the advancement of knowledge is applied in the Lord's service, the whole process becomes absolute. So sociology... Hey, that's okay. Hey, are you hiding? So, it was funny, don't worry. So, that means applying sociology of religion to Krishna's service in a reasonable way, Prabhupada says, is absolute. Applying the history of religions to our mission is absolute. It's not mundane. It's not Maya. It's called Yukta Vairagya. And that's what I tried to do. And I want to say to everybody, if you've got a better idea, for God's sake, please do it. Please tell me, because I would love nothing better than to become obsolete. My goal in life is to become obsolete, not to go around bothering people. So if you've got a better idea to strongly to make Prabhupada's Western mission very powerful in the West, among Western people, if you've got a better idea, I will join you. And I'm serious. I just did the best I could. So Prabhupada said the personality of Godhead, his transcendental name, fame, glory, etc., all non-different from him. Therefore, all the sages and devotees of the Lord have recommended. So if you don't recommend this, you're not, in this list of all the sages and devotees of the Lord. Have recommended that the subject matter of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, and all other branches of knowledge should be wholly and solely applied in the service of the Lord. All the sages, all the devotees say we should take all this learning and use it for Krishna. And I think the most urgent thing we need to study right now is how we fulfill the words of Prabhupada's Pranam mantra, Paschatya Deshatarne. Because right now, if you look at the scoreboard, the Western countries aren't saved. And Prabhupada did not train us just to sit around and wait for prophecies to kick in. So, anyway, so many devotees here are already doing outstanding service. I don't mean to say that no one's doing anything. But somehow or other, we should really put our heads together and really try to figure out, if we study history and Shastra, how is it that small religious movements become world religions? What works? What doesn't work? What are the steps we have to take within the permissible, without changing anything that Prabhupada said not to change, how do we actually do this? I think every serious thinking devotee should participate in this exercise and try to figure this out. So, thank you all very much. Sorry for badgering you all on these points, but so if you have any questions, try my best to answer them. We have a roving microphone. Yes, Kishore Prabhu.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. So many things you brought up, so I wouldn't know where to begin, but I'll just begin with something you've just been discussing now, and that is how important it is to become more savvy, more... For instance, I'm just wondering if, and it's way beyond my time now to be doing it, to go back to school. We're talking about science, religion, philosophy, having a deeper understanding before we can actually offer something valid to ourselves and to the world. Do I have to go back to school?
Oh.
What is it? Just one more thing.
Yeah.
I often found myself somehow or other just beyond. I had a brother and a sister who were very clever, an older brother and an older sister. And when I was a lot younger, before I came to Krishna consciousness, I often wondered, how come I'm not like them? And I never was like them, and over the years, and now I'm 66 years of age, I'm never going to be like them. I am what I am. So are we looking for what's the word I'm looking for? A race of people who have a deeper understanding of things, or who have the capacity to have a deeper understanding of things that I ever had.
No.
Before we can go
No.
forward.
I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm driving my car and the car breaks down. If it depends on me, basically, I will walk for the rest of my life. I'm never going to fix a car. I can't sing like Ananda. And, but I can appreciate her singing. I mean, we all were inspired by her beautiful singing. I mean, it's obvious not that all of us have to go and take singing lessons. That's not going to happen, right? But the point is that if one person sings beautifully, everyone shares in that beautiful singing. Just like, let's say someone makes a lot of money and gives it to Krishna. Millions of people share in the benefits. So let's say a beautiful temple is built or books are printed. Like when George Harrison financed the Krishna book. So basically what I'm saying, I hope this doesn't sound too arrogant. I don't mean it that way, but Prabhupada, when I joined this movement in 1969, I was joking, I'm very young. I actually crawled into the temple at that age. I was only, not really. But when I joined the movement, I was a student at one of the best universities in the world, which was Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And so I asked the temple president if I should stay in the school or just drop out and do Sankirtan. He said, I don't know, ask the regional secretary. That was Tamal H.D.Goswami. So I asked Tamal Krishna, and he said, I don't know, ask Prabhupada. That's the way it was back then. So I wrote a letter to Prabhupada. And he wrote back to me and said, yes, you should stay in school. He said, I want you to get a nice education so that you can preach to similarly educated people. Now, he didn't say, just read my books. Of course, I do read his books, but he said, you also need that. So, just like everyone in this room can do something very well. So, you know, having been a leader in ISKCON for, my God, almost half a century, and having seriously studied the history of religions, you know, the best institutions, there's something I can offer to ISKCON. So it's not that everyone has to do this. Just like I don't have to be a beautiful singer and you don't have to be a, I don't know, carpenter. And so what I've done is I've tried to synthesize these things and present it in some papers. Now, if someone has a better idea, I'm open. If I have to choose between being right and being able to go relax somewhere in California and just write books, I will take California. I mean, just go write books. I would much rather be wrong and be able to get away and just write books. But the point is, I don't know any, I mean, I know this sounds, I don't want to be arrogant, I'm just somehow trying to be honest. I don't see other people who are, very successful leaders in ISKCON at the highest levels and know everything inside out about, that stuff. At the same time, sort of got the best possible education in the history of religions and tried, with a real preaching spirit, not trying to win an argument, but put these things together in a rational way for the consideration of the Vaishnavas. So if someone has a better idea, if someone can show that, I really missed something, it's not logical, there's like an enormous amount of evidence I overlooked, fine. But if not, what I get constantly is, that's wrong, but no, they don't say why. So if I actually got this right, as unflattering as it may sound, if somehow there's some truth in it, then why not benefit from it? It's not that you do things that I can't do. And I can do things you can't do. And Ananda can do things that neither of us can do. So it's not about everyone doing everything. It's just about everyone doing what they can do. And that's the Vedic system. That's the whole idea of the Varnashram system. So I'm presenting to ISKCON what I believe is a serious rational analysis. It may be right, it may be wrong, but it's a serious proposal. And so if it is right, or if it seems right, it's not that I want to be a leader. I don't want any control over anybody's life. My God, I got that out of my system a long time ago. I will never again take responsibility for somebody else's life like that. I don't want to tell anybody what to do. I'm just trying to present something that works, and it's scientific. And so, if people agree, they don't agree, then, explain why, and maybe I'll learn something. But if you can't really explain why it's wrong, then maybe I'm right. Yes, back there.
For your studies, I know very little history of religion, but I'm from a Catholic background.
I'm sorry,
you're okay?
Yeah.
So I know little. I don't know as much about history of religion as you do, but as a little movement, I come from a Catholic background. Obviously, I've been devotee for 25 years or so, and then what I saw as I did like to study the history of Christianity, and obviously I like the beginnings of the Jesus, and that's why I was drawn to the devotees then, because it was small and it was pure and it was wonderful. So how do you become a large institution, large religion, helping the whole world without being corrupted? If you said that we
right.
become a big ISKCON,
right.
But then how do we avoid because bigger you get, then you get all corporate, and then you lose that beautifulness that I was drawn to.
Okay.
Years ago.
Well, first of all, there's nothing more beautiful anywhere than Vrindavan when Krishna's there, right? And yet Krishna left Vrindavan to save the world. Of course, he knocked off some of these sort of bizarre Kamsa demons. But Krishna, look at Lord Chaitanya. If you look at Chaitanya Leela, it exactly maps onto Krishna Leela, in the sense that just like you have Krishna and Vrindavan, there's actually Adi, Madhya, and Antya Leela of Krishna, even though we don't use that terminology. The Adi Leela of Krishna is obviously when he's in Vrindavan. And if you look at Lord Chaitanya in Navadvip, it's relatively a small area. He has very intimate, loving friends. Everyone knows him. It's like Vrindavan. And just as Krishna, let's say Lord Chaitanya left Navadvip, took sannyas in Madhya Leela, and he travels all around and preaches. Krishna's Madhya Leela is when he leaves Vrindavan and he actively kills demons. All these battles with Jarasanda's armies, he actively kills demons. Now, we may not realize it because, how should I put it? If you look at the timeline of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam and compare it to the timeline of the Mahabharata, what you find is that the 10th canto ends at a point where in the Mahabharata it's really just kind of in the middle. So the 10th canto ends. The 10th canto actually ends at the end of Krishna's Madhya Leela. Because what happens after that in Krishna, so to speak, Antya Leela, he no longer personally kills demons, but he only acts through his devotees, the Pandavas and others. Just like Lord Chaitanya, after 6 years, went to Puri, no longer personally went and preached, but just worked through his disciples and his followers, like the Goswamis who were preaching. So, anyway, that's just a little note there. So if you look at Krishna Leela or if you look at Chaitanya Leela, what you find is that Krishna and Lord Chaitanya, same guy, same person, they both left this, ultimately sublime, supremely sublime situation for the same reason, to go out and save the world. As far as saying that the bigger you are, the more corrupt you are, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the bigger you are, the more you can have division of labor, the more you can have. It's not all inbred. It's not all, everyone thinks the same way. Sometimes, for example, why is it that, let's say, London is much more cosmopolitan and liberal in some ways and open to us than some small conservative traditional city or town in England? Because when you get a certain population of scale, you start to get diversity. You start to get people, you don't get division of labor until you get a certain number of people in a society. And then you get people that specialize in philosophy, people that specialize in history. You get diversity, you get different points of view. So just as there are dangers in a larger scale entity, there are very serious dangers in a small scale entity, and we're seeing some of them now. Inbreeding produces debility, just like inbred populations tend to be weak and debilitated. So in the same way, you see certain communities, frankly, of devotees that are kind of like intellectually inbred, where everyone thinks the same way, and if some preacher comes with another idea, even if it's all based on Prabhupada's direct statements, forbidden, you can't come here. Because it's like a small town. It's just like this small town. We don't want people who aren't exactly like us. And you get this exact mentality, frankly, even in so-called spiritual movement in some places. So if I have to choose between the inbred and the cosmopolitan, I think I choose the cosmopolitan. Although, both in a small and a large scale society, there are also special dangers. And we will always have to be vigilant. It's just constant. Lord Chaitanya said, you plant the seed of bhakti lata bij, and then you have to weed your garden, because when you water the devotional plant, you water the weeds. Well, guess what? Weeds are not only individual, they're collective. There are societal weeds. There are weeds in administrative bodies. There are weeds in all kinds of places. Weeds are everywhere. It's just like an individual devotee. Let's say someone's doing something really well, speaking or building or doing something. So the more you serve Krishna, the more people admire you, the more they praise you. So that's the weed. I can become attached to the praise. I can become attached to the acceptance. I want everyone to love me. I want everyone to admire me. At a certain point in your, so to speak, subconscious, what's really motivating me? Am I really doing this for Krishna, or am I performing? And so that's an individual weed. But then you have bodies. There's the iron law of oligarchy. This is a social science principle, which is, social science shows that in oligarchies, which is ruled by the few, ruled by groups, like the GBC party, when you get oligarchies, there are certain dangers. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that in the real world, there are certain dangers. It doesn't mean we should abolish the oligarchy. We follow Prabhupada's system. But we have to know what weeds are. Someone has to know, when is there a weed in an oligarchy? When do we see symptoms of, giving... The iron law of oligarchy is a tendency to be more concerned with one's own authority than with actually serving the people. So you might get a phenomenon like, in the last several years, all the papers that come out from a certain body are all about why we should have power and not you, rather than how we can have justice in ISKCON, how we can revive the Western preaching. You might actually see something like this if you look in certain places. So there are always weeds, collective, individual, community weeds, societal weeds. It's just constant vigilance at every level. Yes. Oh. Is that good old Rupa?
Yeah.
Okay, give it to good old Rupa.
You were contrasting the empiric science with metaphysical. Yeah. Defining the differences between metaphysical and empiric science. But it seems to me that even in the metaphysical science, we make a sort of empirical claim.
Really?
That if you apply this process, you will see the truth. Are we not, in that sense, making an
Okay, good point. I mean, you're taking the word empirical to mean seeing. Oh God, I'm not going to do that again. Interestingly, in the Gita, as I show in my book, this is I won't go into an infomercial now, but I think we have some books here. Krishna, many, many times in the Gita, equates knowing with seeing. Like, the seers of the truth. And then you will see that everything is in me. So Krishna constantly talks about knowledge as seeing something. So obviously, if you take empirical to mean direct experience, which in Sanskrit is pratyaksha, interestingly, pratyaksha, aksha means seeing. So the word for direct experience in Sanskrit, because the eye, being the most prominent organ, is sort of like stands for all the sense organs. So yes, if you take empirical in a broader sense of mean direct perception, yes, then it's empirical. If you take it in the sense of referring to physical sciences, then it's not. So yes, over here, this gentleman in the green shirt, a green sweatshirt.
Thank you. You mentioned how we've got a relevant, strong movement in the West. It reminds me of a lot of quotes from Prabhupada, H.D.Goswami, and H.D.Goswami. And all the religions of the world will shortly, is what H.D.Goswami say, shortly unite under the principle of Kirtan, or be like a one religion. So my question is, have you thought about this one religion, when, how soon it will happen, and will it be like of different departments like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hare Krishna, or will it just be like other religions will kind of just take Christian as being the prominent and will just merge into that concept?
Okay, first of all, I want to make a disclaimer. I, to the best of my knowledge, do not have the power of prophecy. So, I don't think it's likely that all of the religions will vanish. Even, frankly, I think the extent to which we are powerful and really become something in the world, I think that will also be very instrumental in even attracting other religions to want to form an alliance with us. It's just like, America doesn't have a formal military alliance with San Marino, this little independent country in Italy that's about, about 50 acres or something. So, yeah, I think we should just try to really get our movement going. Prabhupada said, Paschatya Desha Tarine. By the way, I'll explain something about the word Tarine. That's the word Prabhupada used. Tarine is a Sanskrit word from the verb which means to cross. And it's actually the same root from which you get the word Tirtha. A Tirtha is a place where you cross over from the material to the spiritual. It's literally a crossing. Just like in English, also the word ford, like Oxford. It's a place where the oxes cross the river, obviously. So, and then take the word avatara. It's the same word in avatara. Ava in Sanskrit means downward. And avatara means literally crossing down. So an avatara is one who crosses down from the spiritual realm to the material realm. So when the avatara crosses down, that crossing, that channel that's opened remains. So if you go to the place where the avatar lived, the channel's still there, and you can cross up. So that's why the same word is used for avatar and tirtha. So now, getting back to Prabhupada's pranam mantra, he said, Paschatya Desha Tarine. Tari in Sanskrit means the crosser, the one who takes you across. And tarine, unto, obeisances unto the one who takes you across. So that means that Prabhupada will take the Western countries across from the material realm into the spiritual realm. That's what it actually means. Of course, it's translated Savior and so on, but that's literally what it means. So, we have a lot of work to do. There's no other question? Then I think we have some prasadam back there. And again, my special thanks to Nanda. And for your very beautiful singing. It's even better live. And thank you, Anjali, for hanging in there for the whole program with little help from your devices. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.